Welcome to this year's awardee of the Twenhofel Medal, and this year it has been given to Gail Ashley, who I believe is based at Rutgers, I believe.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us today to ask you just a few questions about your path through geoscience, as well as key aspects of your career, and kind of your reflections on all that goes together with becoming essentially an amazing geoscientist in your experience and all of that. So before we get on today, of course, I almost forgot to introduce myself. I'm Tara Jonell. I am a postdoctoral researcher here at the University of Glasgow. And I guess in general, I would call myself a sedimentary geologist and interested in a lot, I believe, that of the same concepts and topics that you are, Gail, as well. So it's pretty exciting to be sitting here talking with you. So without further ado, of course, let's get to the meat of all of this. So in 5 minutes or less, Gail, could you summarize your path to the geosciences for all of us?
My lifetime in 5 minutes. Well, I was born in Northampton, Massachusetts, which is in northern New England, or in New England in the U.S. And as a child, I was an outdoorsy kind of kid. I spent all my time outside and exploring and so on. And I guess in retrospect, I would have been called a tomboy, kind of politically incorrect now. But I really was annoyed that boys were able to do anything they wanted to do when they wanted to do it. And so and girls were quite restrained at that time. This was in the 1950s. But girls could ride horses, and so I ended up saving money and bought a horse and spent my teenage years pretty much as on horseback. So how I got into geology was directly related to this. I grew up next to Marshall Schock, who was a professor at Smith College, and his wife Dorothy, who was an artist and a very free spirit woman. And I found that their household was a lot more interesting than mine. My father was a pharmacist, my mother was a homemaker, and I found being over there was a lot interesting, so I spent most of my time over there. As I grew up, I used the Schocks as a role model for what was going to turn out to be a pretty unconventional role for a girl back in the 50s. Marshall Schock went to, he was a geomorphologist, and he went to Alaska every summer. And when he came back, he had wonderful stories about what he did and experiences he had. And so I had questions, and he gave me a geology book to read, and I was a reader anyway, and I just poured through it, and then I began to ask questions, and he gave me more books. And so by the time I was 14, I was really hooked on geology. But I found out that it wasn't being taught in schools at all, in primary school or secondary schools. And when I got to high school even, they did have a elective course. And but I was told not to take it because they said that that geology was not a good track for a career, and that I was going to college, and if I was going to college, I wouldn't want to be a geologist. So that was my advice from my my counselor. So I didn't take geology, but I finally was able to do what I wanted when I got to college. And I majored in geology at University of Massachusetts and did my bachelor's degree there. And I have just one more thing to end up to show how I went from the geosciences into sedimentary geology. Very quickly, I got married, had 2 children, and then started graduate school and stayed in the area where I'd grown up because I had support of my family for taking care of my kids. So I went to school, and at that time, the University of Massachusetts had a very distinguished sedimentary geologist named Miles Hayes, who was a coastal geologist, and he had a huge team of graduate students. I was working on glaciers at the time, and there were a few of us that were interested in glacial landforms, and we sort of bonded and blended, and I ended up in a group that was one of the first really to start to approach, use in their approach to science, sedimentological principles and trying to understand landforms. So is that 5 minutes?
You still have time, actually.
Well, that's pretty much how I ended up in sedimentary geology. But it was a fairly direct track, and I have to give all my thanks to Marshall Schock, who steered me in that direction.
What a fantastic journey you've had, and I think that you kind of outlined that it must have taken a lot of resilience to go against kind of these conventional narratives for what you should and you shouldn't do, and kind of following your interests and kind of your foundation, and kind of getting to know the outside world and being fascinated by it. It's always a fun story to hear. So along with that kind of transition that you ended on, and kind of these groundbreaking, more or less, techniques or perspectives on different aspects of geology, and especially applying sedimentary geology and the knowledge of that to other places and processes. This connects a little bit with kind of your career and the things that you've done as part of your career. So what could you say that you're most proud of in your career? Not a small question, of course.
Well, there's actually, it's hard to pick and choose, but there's a couple of things, and I'll just say them very briefly. I'm really proud of my students. I had 39 students that I supervised over my career, and each one had their their strengths and their interests, and I learned a lot from them. I'm really proud of that. I'm really proud of them, of which I think 15 out of the 40 were women, so that was good. In terms of the science that I'm proud of, I think just two aspects. One is my specialty is paleoenvironmental reconstruction of sedimentary deposits. And I think the one thing that I'm most proud of is the fact that I was able to appreciate the role of groundwater, subsurface water in human evolution and human survival in East Africa, as opposed to surface water like lakes and rivers. And so that was what I worked on for the last like 25 years, and I'm quite proud of that. Recognition. And then that connected with that is also the naming of and the launching of the critical zone, which is that zone of the Earth's surface from the tops of the tree canopy down into bedrock, where water and air can't move. So that fringe, that very narrow fringe of the Earth, I called the critical zone, and it's been a framework for discovering the processes that go on in that part of the Earth. So I'll leave it at that.
It's an incredible breadth to that answer, but I really enjoyed the first, especially the first one that you mentioned, that kind of the support and kind of the pride that you have in your students, because often it's the people that we work with that kind of collectively make us really good as scientists. And especially with the last two that you just mentioned, and I'm curious about also some of your work that you've done with groundwater and in various parts of Africa, and maybe this will play into it in this next question, is have you encountered any challenges or setbacks that turned out to be actually quite valuable in regards to those, or others, of course?
Yeah, in terms of challenges, I guess one thing that stands out in my mind is that about halfway through my my career, I consider my career about 50 years, and so about 25 years into it, I was working for with a team, large team in Africa, and I was there as the geologist and was, you know, interpreting things and so on. And out of the blue, I got an email from the director, and he fired me. He just laid me off and said that that I wasn't supporting the team, and I kind of looked at that, and what I found out is that my interpretations were definitely different from theirs, and I was ready to publish those things, and I was already talking about them, and they said, well, you're out of here. And so I was just absolutely stunned, absolutely blown away. It took away my self-esteem. It took away a little bit of my self-confidence, and so I was thrashing around trying to figure out what to do. And I did have some colleagues that were helpful, that suggested it, about just moving into a different area. So I did that. I did 180, and I established new connections. I established a new field area, and established a new, not a different research program, but in a different area. And it was definitely a challenge, and I learned a lot from it, but it was painful in the process. I think that's...
Wow, that is quite an unpredictable challenge that you had to overcome. I mean, nothing ruins a beautiful story is a nice fact, right? But it's really impressive that, as you said, you kind of this 180, and you were able to kind of take all that you've built up to that point in your experiences and just be like, okay, all right, well, what do I have to do next?
It wasn't that easy, but I mean, you did ask, and I did learn a lot from it. So even though it was painful going through it. So.
Yeah. Yes. So this somewhat touches on that, but of course could equally be applied elsewhere. If you could go back in time, is there anything you would do differently?
Oh, yeah, of course. There's a lot of things that you learn going along. But I think the real basic thing that I really found that was a problem that recurred over and over again was the fact that I didn't feel like I had an adequate amount of mathematics, chemistry, and physics. I had taken all the courses that were required. I'd done well in them. But when it came down to push come to shove and understanding complex equations and relationships and processes, I was always scrambling to go back and relearn stuff that I hadn't learned in the first place. So I think if I had to do it over again, I would have taken a lot more basic STEM courses. And so that's what I advise all my students, advise my children, advise everybody, because I think that it was a struggle because of it in certain situations.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I could see that is very sound advice, because I could definitely see many cases in my own career where I've had to go, uh-oh, I should have taken better notes. Or maybe I should have signed up for that course in the past. Or again, what people had said to me in my ear in the past, and I brushed that off. So, but yeah. Okay, so let's focus next on kind of work-life balance, because you have a lot. I mean, it takes a lot to, of course, be a great geoscientist, but also there's more than just that when it comes to being a person, right? So how do you manage your time, kind of maintain that what's to you a work-life balance?
Yeah. I feel like it has been a struggle because it's being a woman and having a family and having a relationship and having a career and having expectations for working really hard and doing good work. That I really did have it was a bit of a struggle, and I never really felt like I had done a really good job in all three things. And although my kids tell me they were happy and they've grown up to be happy taxpayers, so to speak. And my career has turned out well. I've had a happy time at that. So that worked out, but it was always a struggle, and I had to work. You really have to put a lot of hours in, and so in terms of time management, I never felt like I'd done a great job, but I must have done okay because I've got to be where I am. So today, I don't know if that's the answer you were looking for, but it's tough to do, I think.
Sorry, I guess what I was going to say is that's a really pragmatic answer, I think, and a realistic answer, because I think that having a complete work-life balance all the time is often quite difficult, especially if you're a caregiver at all and you're maintaining friendships and partnerships, along with, again, having this career and all the expectations that are then on top of that. So it's quite a lot to equally balance, if at all equally, at any point in time. And so along with kind of that journey and maintaining this and building a career, what skills do you think that were kind of essential to doing that, or foundational perhaps? And you might have touched on this in kind of one of the prior questions about STEM skills as well, but foundational skills or essential skills.
I think well, there's a number of things that are helpful, but at the top of the list, I actually think social skills are pretty important. And you don't really think of that you're even being social, but interacting with people and having successful interactions with folks, your students, your faculty, fellow faculty members, the colleagues that you're working with, the people who are, like at NSF and so on. That social skills are, I think, are pretty important. And then definitely organizational skills, because if you can't organize your personal life, your daily life, your research programs, that nothing will work. So you really have to have pretty good organizational skills, social skills, organizational skills. I'm trying to think what else. I think a sense of humor helps. Sense of humor, and do not take yourself too seriously. But another one might be leadership skills. And you think when people look at what an academic does, it probably wouldn't say, well, you have leadership skills, but you do, in terms of being able to set an example for your graduate students and the mentoring that you do, and just making, particularly if you're going to push the envelope a little bit and do things that are not that haven't been done before, you really do have to be kind of pushy. And I always remember, I go back to when my mother said, "You're too pushy, Gail. It's not going to be good for you to be too pushy." And so I was always trying not to be too pushy. But then when push comes to shove, so to speak, you really do have to be a bit on the pushy side to make things happen. And I think be out there, out leading the pack. So that's where the leadership comes in. I guess that's enough, right?
Yeah.
I'm trying to think if there's any more that, I think that's about it.
Okay. Well, if you think of more, we can always add to that list.
Okay.
And so this, following up on, I guess, leadership a little bit, and I guess what some people think of what makes a leader, and somewhat anyway, is would you say that success and fulfillment would be interchangeable? And I guess that often kind of defines within your experience of how you might define them.
Yeah. Yeah, well, success, I think success and fulfillment can be interchangeable. I think of success as what other people view your accomplishments, and fulfillment is more is how you as a person feel about how your accomplishments. So it's like more of a personal view versus from the outside view. So so those two things can be interchangeable, but they can be very different things. Like, for example, fulfillment. One of the things that makes me pleased and happy is to see a student who's been struggling along and doesn't know what they want to do with their life, and all of a sudden the light bulb goes off and they find out what they want to do, and I get a little thank you note saying, "Oh, Dr. Ashley, thank you for helping me through all this," and stuff like that. So this little burst of personal interaction with people on, can be really rewarding, and you figure, well, maybe it is worth it all. So that kind of thing is fulfillment. And no one else on the outside would say, oh, they wouldn't appreciate it at all. Spending time with a student who might have seemed hopeless at the beginning. And success, I'm frantically trying to think of something that would be successful that I wouldn't have thought would be successful from the outside accomplishments. I guess it might be all the committees I've been on. I've been on a lot of committees over my lifetime. In fact, one of my colleagues who will remain nameless used to call me the committee lady because I used to be on all these committees. But they're a lot of work. Some of them are could be considered a complete waste of time. But others are really important because you have a chance to make a change. You have a chance to make an impact. You can, if you're appointing people, you can make sure that people that are being bypassed are getting appointed and make things more, more diverse, that kind of thing. So you can be really helpful on it if you're in a leadership position of a committee, for example, or if you can vote. So I don't know if I've sort of gone down a rabbit hole, but I think there are situations in which being on a committee would be considered successful by a lot of people, and I would have, but in other times I just thought it was a waste of my time. So anyway, I guess I don't know if I've answered that question or not, but I think they can be two different things, but they can be similar as well.
Well, it's nice to see that in two different ways that you've been trying to kind of enact change and improve essentially the lives of others as well as kind of your institution by both investing your time and your effort and your skills into your students, and as well as taking that and doing that essentially through committees. So things that both you even said, like people view as almost lesser than or less worthy. I mean, I think they're both valid things and worthy of defining success or and of course finding fulfillment in both of those. So I think that that's a really a nice interpretation and a very interesting interpretation of the question that I think maybe some people would have overlooked but are incredibly important. So thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
So now we're going to move on to taking what you have learned in your experiences and your careers and kind of your perspective within the field and maybe look at the future of kind of geoscience and even more broadly society. So, not that there were any tough questions before, but, maybe we'll get to some, tough ones now. So let's lead off, of course, with this one. So in your opinion, how has geoscience as a field changed over the years? And I guess how would you see geoscience or geoscience research kind of evolving in the coming years?
So geoscience itself, well, of course, when I first started, there were the focus of the careers, the focus of livelihoods and jobs was in the fossil fuel industry and the extraction industry, and everybody worked for companies, and that was the goal when you went through school. And a few people wanted to be academics, so that over the last 2 or 3, 4 decades, it's gradually changed. So there's fewer and fewer people going into the fossil fuel industry, and a lot more going into things like environmental companies, alternate energy sources, NGOs, government, and so on. So the overall science is, and what geologists are hired for has really changed, and that's been driven by things outside our control, but that's just the way it is. And we've had a lot of ups and downs. There's been highs and lows in employment, and then I think geologists are just about going to be out of the picture, and then something will come in and there's a boom again. So I've seen 2 or 3 booms and busts over my time in the field. So that's where I've seen the changes in geology. And of course, the participants have changed. When I first started, there were very few women, and now there's a large proportion. In terms of employment, almost a half, but not quite. So things have changed, and the employment industry is a lot more diverse. There's a lot more of a variety of ethnic backgrounds and backgrounds that are now are employed as geologists. So it's both what they're doing and who's doing it has changed, I would say.
Excellent. Good. I mean, it's nice to hear that we've seen improvements in terms of the different and variety of perspectives that are available within our field. And you've mentioned a bit of the fossil fuel industry and potentially its impact on, of course, the cyclical nature of geoscience employment and somewhat and its effect and the makeup of, I guess, geoscience employment today. So what would you say that what impact has this geoscience research and this practice that you probably mentioned? How can that be used to, I guess, ensure human sustainability? Do you think that there are any resources that we should, I guess, capitalize on, for lack of a better word, to reach it?
Wow, that's a very difficult question. I wish I had a crystal ball for some of those, but for that particular one. For your focusing on sustainability, did you say?
Yes. Yeah, human sustainability. Although I think maybe just sustainability, maybe even beyond humans, is probably maybe a better way to think about it.
Yeah. Well, we're seeing this. We're seeing this going on right now. We are in what is now called the Anthropocene, where humans are dominating the geological processes, actually. And so sustainability is going to rely on geologists. Everything that we use or need is in the realm of geology, like groundwater, water supply for drinking and for agriculture, and of course energy, fossil fuel, the pulling away from fossil fuels, although we're going to need some, but the using alternate energy sources, and we're going to have to be clever to come up with means of sustaining large population that is happening at the present time, the increase in population. So I don't really have an answer for it. I just wish there were more geologists. I just wish there were more people that appreciated the need for geology. Your question just brought to mind a man who's now passed. He was president of the Geological Society of America. He worked for the USGS, and his name was Ian Zen. And Ian Zen had a great idea, and he said that he thought everyone in the United States, maybe in the world, should be a citizen geologist. And if everybody was a citizen geologist, everybody had taken at least one course in geology, 101 even would be great, that we would be in a much better position to deal with the problems that were coming up. And that was Ian's idea, and that idea has sort of lost traction. I haven't heard of that term for a long time. I just happened to think of it when you were saying the question. So anyway, that's I think we have the ability to develop and to create a sustainable world. It just takes an understanding and a will to do it, I guess.
This feeds perfectly into the next question that I would like to ask. So you mentioned that the importance of this kind of even just a basic background for geoscience and geological knowledge for essentially non-professional working geoscientists. So do you think that we're doing a good job now at kind of providing this information to people? And if not, what can we do better?
I think the big answer there is no. We're not doing a very good job. You'd be surprised how many, I mean, you know that there's many people that if you meet them at a party, they ask you what you do, they have really no idea even when you explain what you're doing. So there's a lot of intelligent people out there that just simply don't appreciate geology or the earth sciences or the need to know. One of the, I think, did you ask what I thought what we should do? Okay.
Yes. Is there anything we could do better, or that you have in mind that you thought of in the past?
Yeah, well, this wasn't my idea, but I think it was a great one, and I think it's something that we should do, and it's another thing that sort of the ball has been dropped, I think, and this was a pamphlet put out by AGI, which is Association of Geological Institute, and they're based in outside of Washington. And they put together a very small pamphlet, just the size of like a kid's coloring book. And in it, it said it was basically all things that were the critical needs for that year. They published it, and it would be for, say, 1990 or whatever year it came out. The critical needs for that time period and the role of geoscientists in it. And in that was like maybe 10 pages. And they would talk about, very simple page, a lot of pretty pictures, about the importance of water, just plain water, clean water, and how to get water into, like, even in arid lands and so on. Things like the critical minerals, critical elements that are needed for electronics. Let's see, what else? Infrastructure, metals needed for infrastructure. I'm trying to think what else. Oh yeah, the understanding where to dispose of waste, everything from nuclear waste to domestic wastes, and so on, a number of things like that. And there was like maybe 8 or 10 And you look at them, and every single one of them is based in understanding geology, or in the context of geology. And if you gave one of those pamphlets, we gave a pamphlet to every single person in the House, and every single person in the Senate. And so they all had it. They probably just gave it to their assistants, and the assistants put it in the bin. I don't know. But I think if everybody read that, that would have been great. Now, that's the federal government. But what about all the state governments? These are the people that make decisions, the policy makers, the decision makers. If they just had a little bit of background on it, I think. So I don't know how many thousands you would need to give to every, even every blue state, every red state, every purple state. Their legislature should have one, because they are in a position to make things happen, and that's be a start. So that's kind of something that wasn't my idea, but was a good thing. I think a good idea, and should be rethought of again and continued on the state level. Would be great.
A fabulous idea, and I like hearing about it. And I mean, as you said, there's just so much that we could all learn, essentially to do better, to take care of our planet, our resources, what to do with those resources, and how, with a little bit of geological knowledge, we can do that. So yeah, it's a simple idea with a really broad, essentially, scope for impact. So
yeah. And it wouldn't cost that much. I mean, really, look at all the junk mail we get. I mean, this could be, not junk mail, good mail.
Yeah, and with the advent of digital resources, I mean, who knows, with all these short videos that exist on the internet, you could do all sorts of things with informational pamphlets. Yeah. So we're going to change slight in terms of our focus and questions next. So, and you mentioned this, I think, in the first question when we were talking about these kind of cyclical changes with geoscience jobs. And there's a lot of job opportunities that exist and don't exist, and challenges that come with that. So why would one even consider a career in geosciences? This also leads on to the last question too.
Yeah. Why should I mean, I've tried to answer that question when I had parents coming in with their children, grown-up children, teenagers, that might be thinking about going to Rutgers, and they said, well, what can my son do with a degree? And it's always difficult to argue the money end of things, because of the fact that if the student goes into being a lawyer or something, money, investors and so on. Geologists are never going to die rich necessarily, particularly if they just stay in their field. So it is always a bit awkward to make a case for it. But I found over the years I had to make less and less of a case, because more and more of the students wanted to change the world, wanted to become more active. In the past, they were interested in making money. They would go to the oil companies and they would make money. But somewhere, I don't know exactly when this transition happened, but in maybe the last 10 or 15 years, or maybe 20 years, the students all one by one they said, I don't think I really want to, get more oil. And I think I would like to try to do something that would be helpful. What can I do? And so you see more and more students who, out of their own understanding of the world, want to make a change. And so that's, I think, a little bit easier to advise somebody who wants to make a change and not necessarily want to make money, to be able to make a case for geology. And so I give suggestions on what can be done, and what kind of jobs my students have gotten over the over the past. And so that kind of helps. It was a lot easier to advise people who wanted to change the world than ones who wanted to just make money. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's what I found.
Well, it's refreshing, I think, to hear that instead of, as you, if I summarize your words here, is that it's less about me and more about us.
Yeah, right. It's true. I really have seen that happen on my own watch.
That's fantastic. That's I'd say great news. With a lot of stuff that we see in news today that still kind of downplay that maybe a little bit. So in terms for, okay, you have a student who's interested in doing geology now, and they're doing it. So what are some of the key transferable skills that essentially these students have developed? And I guess along with this, were there any key transferable skills that even you developed that then allowed you more or less to help progress your career?
Well, I might have already mentioned these. I'm sounding like I'm being repetitive, but I feel that the social skills are really important. If you have a problem communicating with people or relating to people or feeling empathy for people even, I think a person and going into a career would have a difficult time. So social skills are really important, and that just extends into networking. That means making a network. I did this very early on when I first started out, networked, and was able to. I think that helped me along the way, and I would say that for students too. And it's too bad when they're shy. You try to encourage them to do things that go with a friend, and I don't know how you turn a shy person into one who's not, but it really helps to network. Let's see, what else? Social skills, networking, and time management. I think time management's really important. And what I mean by time management is you need to have a plan short term, like on the day. You need to have how that plan turns into what you're going to accomplish by the end of the week, the end of the month, the end of the year, and then 5 years. Now, my life went in 5-year plans. I never made too much plan after 5 years. I would go 5 years, and then I'd be thinking, what am I going to do the next 5 years? Am I going this? But I never thought ahead too much more than 5 years. I mean, I thought, okay, I want to, be a professor and so in 10 or 15 years. But in terms of actually accomplishing something, I found that a 5-year plan was helped me. I was more likely to accomplish it because it was a shorter time frame, and also, but it was long enough so that I could adapt to it if like I didn't get the grant or I didn't get the paper published or something, I could make a mid-course correction. So the question was specifically about skills that I had that I should advise young people to have, or what? Is that what you said?
Yeah, just transferable skills. Like, so not only, I guess, useful potentially to maybe a geoscientist, but also just the broad range of skills that as geoscientists develops in their studies that is widely applicable. But I think everything that you've said so far between networking and time management are remarkably useful.
Yeah. The other thing that well, I don't know if this fits in or not, whether this is fits into this. I think that I never stopped learning. I always would always try to learn, to continue to learn, go back and get that, this math and chemistry, but also to learn other things which were coming on board. So I tried to keep up without going crazy like President Carter. I tried to keep up with things, and I was always looking for in engineering or in biology or in some other field, look at sort of approaches that they took to science or things that they were discovering and see, I wonder if I could adapt that to what I'm doing. So rather than having blinders on, and without wandering off and losing track of what I was doing, I tried to bring in a wider range of ideas to infuse a life or creativity into what I was doing that was happening in other fields. And unless you keep track of what's going on, you might lose some of this. And so I've always tell my students, don't become an expert at one thing and paint yourself into a corner, because all of a sudden, as we have seen, the employment industry has changed, and anybody who was like all oil company oriented and they didn't know anything else and had an attitude about not wanting to know anything else, then it was definitely a not a good thing. So that was my advice to them, was to keep open and keep your mind in a receiving mode rather than not. Yeah.
Nice. When you're saying that in terms for the flexibility, I was thinking in my brain, oh, transdisciplinarity before it became kind of this hot topic, like transdisciplinarity before it was cool, you know. No, I like that. I think that it is very good, as you said, to keep it in mind, open, kind of don't have your blinders on, just, you know, be receptive, as you said, to knowledge and being unafraid to kind of step a little bit outside of your comfort zone into essentially maybe holistic is maybe a wrong word here, which I'm applying, but potentially more perspective will give you a better understanding of the problem or the challenge at hand. Yeah, that's really nice. So now we're gonna, I think, come up to maybe one of the last one or two questions here before we'll have to say goodbye for today. And this touches a little bit on kind of these skills that you were mentioning, and that it might be kind of scary or daunting or uncomfortable for people to develop these skills, and as you said, leadership, or time management, or you know, networking, and of course, and looking outside of just your explicitly, you know, said field of expertise. So what else should other students or young professionals or early career scientists be doing to kind of improve their career prospects?
I think it's pretty much what I've just said before. Yeah, it's maintaining. You have to have a bit of self-discipline, because I've had students who wander all over the place, and they go, oh, isn't this interesting? I think I'm going to study, you know, soils. Oh no, I think I'll maybe go look into volcanoes. And so you want to be able to have some sort of constraining limits on your wandering around, but you also don't need to want to shut a door on some good ideas that might be transferable into what you're doing. So I think that's kind of what I've just said on the last question, to be receptive to new ideas, and to actually be looking for a fresh approach too, not just wait around, look for somebody to come up with an idea and then steal it from them, but to see an approach that they might be taking and how you might use that approach in what you're doing, and that sort of thing. So I don't know if that, I think it's pretty much has answered it, what I had just said before.
No, I think you've made a strong point in the case for, as you said, these skills as well as more or less being a leader in terms of course, not just your field, but where you want to go and how you can kind of improve your discipline and not necessarily follow your passion, but perhaps maybe doing that. So now we have our last question in terms of the interview for today. So reflecting on your own passion towards your discipline and having, of course, discipline within your passion, do you think loving what you do comes with time, or is it something that changes or essentially like ebbs and wanes, or well, waxes and wanes, there we
go. Yeah, well, in my case, I was not really a good person to ask, because as I mentioned at the beginning, I was interested in geology from the time I was about 12 and 14, and then I was interested in it my whole life, and I never waned from that. So I'm not the best person to ask about that particular question. I love what I do, and I loved it from the beginning, and there were ups and downs, of course. There's triumphs and there's challenges, a couple of it, one that I mentioned, and so on. But I have supervised a lot of students, undergraduate students, PhD and masters. And I was also undergraduate director for many years. And so I talked to a lot of undergraduates who were still very much in their formative years. And I've seen young men and women who from the get-go have no idea what they want to do, or they just don't think they're ever going to find anything that's going to make them happy. And I try to encourage them to do that. Of course, their parents aren't happy if I give them advice about doing something that's not going to make that they get out and they can't find a job. Well, students always seem to have found a job. Actually, most of our students get jobs, so I think the parents worry too much. But I love what I did, and I encourage my students and I encourage my children to choose what they love to do and to try to work toward that. You have to make compromises often, because you can't always get into a position where you can support yourself and you can love it. But you've got a lifetime, and you can, if you make some compromises and are patient, you can eventually should be able to work your way into a job that you like doing. I feel very sad for people who end up working at a job that they don't like, and they have to stay at that job they don't like. And I don't know whether they have to stay. Maybe they do, or maybe they just haven't had enough get up and go to make something else happen. But I think loving a job, you can eventually learn to, even if you have to change your job that you're doing to love it. So I think people should try to be happy. It is only as it's been said, life is not a dress rehearsal, and it's great if you can end up working and doing something that you love to do. So with that,
Very solid advice there. And so before we end this, are there any words or remarks that you would like to share?
Oh gosh, I hadn't thought about that. I am really pleased to get this award. I was just absolutely stunned and surprised. I thought because I didn't know whether you knew I'm retired. I retired a few years ago before the pandemic, and so I was so excited to get this award because I've been a sedimentary geologist, as I mentioned, all the way ever since 1970s, you know, it's a long time, and a very dedicated member of SEPM and the organization. And so I was so pleased to get the Twenhofel, which is their top award. And I want to thank everyone who was involved in that, in making it happen, because it made me very pleased and proud. So
that is amazing to hear, and thank you so much for your time and sharing your experiences with me and with everybody who will be watching this video in the very near future. I want to offer you my congratulations for receiving this amazing award, and just showcasing all that you've learned and clearly what you're willing to share with your students and to the wider public in terms of how we can use geoscience to solve great problems and understand essentially our own backgrounds as humans, essentially in the deep past as well. So thank you again for your time, and I hope that you enjoy the hunting of your, I believe, meteorites or maybe space debris, but either case, a fun hunt nonetheless for the rest of your day.
For those of you who weren't privy to this, this is May 10th, and there was a supposed something heavy metal rock that's fallen through a roof in a house not too far from where we live. And my husband's a meteoriticist, and we're going to go off and he's going to decide what it is, or test it perhaps with a little bit of luck. Very exciting.
The adventure continues, right?
Yeah, yes. Science is always an adventure. You never know what's going to drop out of the sky, so to speak.
In this case, literally.
Thank you, Tara, very much.
All right, thank you. Have a lovely day. Bye.
Bye-bye.